Hello and welcome to this lecture series on the Eisenhower era. Let's start with part one, the election of 1952. With the ratification of the 22nd Amendment, we now have established that a president can no longer serve more than 2 terms or a maximum of 10 years. However, Harry S. Truman, who was president at the time that this was ratified, was not subject to that. So in 1952, he could have, if he wanted to, run for another term as president. However, he had announced that he had no intention in continuing on as the president. He was very unpopular by the time he left office. Even within his own party, Democrats actually would use the old term to err is human, except they modified it to say to err is Truman, right? So the Democrats were looking for a candidate, and they found one in a man named Adlai Stevenson. Adlai Stevenson was chosen because, well, he had no political connections to Harry Truman, so you couldn't blame him for the sins of the previous administration. The Republicans were scrambling for a candidate as well. Now, Douglas MacArthur had come back after being fired from in Korea and had entertained thoughts of being a presidential candidate, but quite honestly, with his radical talk of like putting radioactive waste in the Yellow River, the Republicans didn't want anything to do with him. What they did instead was they tapped into a political centrist, a moderate, who could have actually been a candidate for either party, the war hero Dwight David Eisenhower. All right. Eisenhower, after being the commander-in-chief of Allied forces in Europe, went on to be the first commander of NATO, and then now he's going to come back and run for president as a Republican. The political issues for this 1952 election are going to be ending the Korean War, dealing with corruption in government, and balancing the budget. Right? Both men will campaign, but they won't really campaign against each other because both of them have the same kind of limitation. First of all, Adlai Stevenson, it wouldn't make sense for him to attack the war hero, Dwight Eisenhower. And as far as Eisenhower goes, well, there's not really a lot you can say about Adlai Stevenson because, well, he's, like I said, he's not really associated with Truman. However, this is going to be the first presidential campaign where you have the wide use of political campaign ads on television, right? Television's becoming more and more prominent. Matter of fact, if you go to a website called www.livingroomcandidate.org, you can actually watch every single presidential campaign commercial, beginning with these ones in 1952. Now, Adlai Stevenson really doesn't stand a chance against Eisenhower. I mean, the war hero. We have a long history of rewarding our war heroes by making them president of the United States. I mean, take a look at, for example, Washington, Jackson, William Henry Harrison, Zachary Taylor, Ulysses S. Grant. I mean, the list goes on. Okay, so Adlai Stevenson loses pretty soundly to Eisenhower in 1952. And in fact, in 1956, the Democratic Party believes they can't beat Eisenhower for re-election. They'll run Adlai Stevenson against him again, kind of making him a sacrificial lamb rather than sacrificing new blood. Don't feel too bad for Adlai Stevenson. He'll go on to be a member of the United Nations, representing the United States, and he'll be involved in one of the most memorable interchanges on the floor of the UN when he gets into it with the Soviet delegate during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The interchange is so heated and so historically interesting that it was actually stolen by one of the Star Trek movies and adapted for the trial of Captain Kirk.